We'll go ahead and get started. I know we have three folks here, Brandon, Gavin, and Aaron. If you all are able to, we encourage you to turn on your video. That way we can see you. Awesome, thank you. So welcome to today's Y session. So today we have Center for Student Involvement, Luis Legaspi. So they'll be introducing themselves a little bit more. Today's focused on student leadership involvement in a virtual setting. So some of you may be board members or applying to be on board. I know a common thing I've heard between student orgs is kind of the struggle with virtual involvement. So I'll turn it on over to Luis.
Thank you. Hola, hola, buenas tardes. My name is Luis Legaspi, and my gender pronouns are he, him, his. So for today's session, it's going to be totally interactive, completely interactive, because the whole premise is the way that I understood it is just trying to help you all as leaders. How do you drive engagement as you try to advance forth any organizational mission? It's tricky in this digital environment to get people to show their video. Sometimes you can't get the video on because you don't have the technology. You don't want random people in your home. So what are the tactics that you can, as leaders, in your communication and how you facilitate a meeting, drive engagement is what I'm hearing. Now, this is where I pause because it's going to be completely interactive. That means that I want to meet you where you're at. I have a kind of a presentation to scaffold us, but there are going to be a bunch of activities for us to engage in. And so before I show you the presentation, I like to tell you all how I like to be engaged, right? So I'm gonna communicate what engagement looks like. So you've already been asked to turn on your camera. I'm gonna once again just remind it, and this is why I'm telling you. So there's a mixture of why cameras can be helpful. I personally, like Luis, understand that we may not have the technology. Sometimes we don't have a space to want to show what's happening. So I constantly cue to any presentation. I tell people why I want to see your face. One of it is sometimes to just see how you respond. So that's kind of nice to be able to see when you might furrow your eyebrows or be like, I don't know what he's saying. So from an empathy standpoint, it can be very helpful. And it's not the only way to engage, but it's nice. So I share that with you all because as leaders, we oftentimes do get verbal feedbacks and visual feedbacks to be like, okay, have I lost the group? So just keep that in mind. See like that, Brandon. I like that I could see you smile. Alrighty. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to ask you a few questions. So I like to say this to everyone. I'm personally very insecure. I need a lot of attention. So I need some kind of affirmation. You can use functions like an actual thumbs up, like raising your thumbs visually for those of you using your camera. You can put it in the chat box. You can use the functions that allow you to do reactions, right? Sorry, I just pushed something I wasn't supposed to. Anyways, while I recalibrate, can someone help me out real quick? Sorry. Okay, rookie mistake. See, I make mistakes too. Anyways, so let me ask, how do you all get some kind of feedback, right? Especially in a remote environment. I want to hear your voices. I want to hear you in the chat box. How do you engage?
So I'm not sure if I fully understand your question. Do you mean just like how we get people to engage, or how do we usually get like ourselves engaged when we go to them?
So great. Thank you for that. Aaron, I would say, how do you get people to engage? My understanding is your session today is about your active leaders within organizations. How do you get your group of people to engage?
So I guess one thing, so I'm part of Swiss. One thing we do is we start with an icebreaker. Going into smaller groups, I think does help. More people usually tend to turn on their camera in the smaller groups. But then it is difficult going back into the main room to keep that involvement, I think.
Thanks, Erin. Brandon?
I mean, I guess like, sorry, I have like some background noise. Probably, I mean, the breakout rooms thing sounds pretty good, and I've seen it be quite effective. I've also like sometimes running a Discord in parallel with the class. People will be more inclined to like chat in the Discord.
Can you tell, in case some of us on this call do not know what Discord is, can you share what Discord is?
Oh, it's like this like group chat kind of thing. It's like instant messaging service, web-based, or you can get an app.
Brandon, let's think. Okay, actually, let me ask you this question too. Ali, I'm going to ask you to participate as an active participant, right?
Yeah, of course.
So we're brainstorming. There's only 4 of us, right? And so this is great. I love intimate groups like this. Even amongst ourselves, we're negotiating. How do I communicate? When do I communicate, right? And so your job in every session, whatever that looks like, how do you get people to talk? What are the things you can engage in? So Discord is a great idea, Brandon. That creates a kind of a community. So some people will really resonate with it. Why do you choose that over the chat box here?
Well, it has like a nicer interface generally. And then also sometimes with the Zoom chat, it's like, I don't know, a little bit, depending upon the class, sometimes teachers actually turn it off, which kind of puts a damper on things. But also, I feel like people are just a little bit more willing to chat in the Discord just because it's not like, you don't really know like the teacher's like looking at everything you say. So if you just want to like talk to your friend about, oh, you're understanding the material, feels a little bit more comfortable, I think.
Okay. So if we wanted to create a Discord right now, could we?
I mean, you could like set up a server and send a link to the chat, I guess.
So Discord, Luis, is another platform that our engineering students use, kind of like Slack. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Slack, and our engineering students use it a lot to connect within their orgs. Yeah. Kind of like a Facebook group, but it's all on the platform.
So, no, I know what Discord is. What I'm asking for all of us as a collective, right, is this idea of how do we drive engagement, right? So you all within engineering are familiar with Discord, right? What happens in your class? Let's say you're in an English literature class. Let's say you're in your psych course. Would your peers know Discord, and would they want to engage in Discord, right? So like this entire session is about thinking about what approach do you all as leaders engage in to drive engagement, right? Like what things, what tactics, what approaches. So I love this. Discord is an option. But what happens when someone like myself is like, I don't use Discord. I know what it is. I've never used it. So that's why my question was like, what if I wanted to create it right now? Could we? All right, let me flip this question. Brandon and Erin, particularly for both of you. What organizations do you lead or are a member of that you would want to engage in these practices, right? Like, are you a chair? Are you a president? Are you the VP of marketing? Like, what organizations might these practices help you out in, if at all?
Well, I mean, probably the closest thing for like organizing people through Discord was just reorganizing my trivia team. And we just used Discord for that. Happened to work out because everyone had it and everyone knew how to use it. So it happened to match the audience.
Yeah.
What org are you part of, Brandon?
I'm currently part of SWA.
What is this?
Students who engage, learn, and lead. It's like a program aggregator, basically.
What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, so I'm on the Whiteboard. We also had the discussion of like, do we use Discord or not at the beginning of the year? Definitely. We actually ended up using Slack throughout the year for our engagement. And yeah, I think we definitely had a big discussion on it, like which one do we want to use, which one would everyone prefer. And some of us felt like Discord was not as welcoming because it is very like, I don't know, you know, it's like it's dark mode. It's some people have a certain view of it, and like also just sometimes it's buggy. Some of us were talking about, so we decided on Slack. But even with Slack, then there's also like Slack's often associated more with like professionalism and work. So then finding the balance between like finding a platform that's still like welcoming to everyone, but then also lets them feel comfortable enough to like be personal, definitely seems like a difficult thing because they're kind of like the opposite sides of that messaging platform in a sense.
See, I love that, Aaron, right? So like you're getting at the core of the question, right? So like as leaders, in whatever capacity you're in, you're constantly making trade-offs, right? So like I don't particularly like the chat box in Zoom at all. When I facilitate sessions, I don't encourage chatting at all because I want you all to talk, right? And not because I am aware that sometimes we don't have microphones or there's a lot of noise. As a practice, and this is an idealized practice, I'm always in the business of getting people to talk, right? And as leaders, you're probably in a similar business, right? You're trying to get people to talk, to give ideas, to brainstorm, to tell you what's next. But if we have this function of saying, immediately mute yourself, then how do I get you to unmute yourself if my ground rule is everyone mute yourself? I don't want to hear that there's a car outside. I don't want to hear the helicopter. I don't want to hear that there's a dog jumping on your lap. I don't want to hear any of that, right? So we're creating this culture in this virtual environment. Mute yourself. Like all of you on this call right now are muted. Why?
There's a bunch of other people talking in the background for me. One way I've seen it done in kind of like smaller meetings, for one of the research projects I'm on, the coordinator just says like, regardless of background noise, you can just be unmuted, pretend like it's in person. The issue with that though is like, sometimes there's a couple of people who are like near traffic or something, and then it gets very hard to hear anything. And so then they end up muting to preserve the meeting for everyone else.
That's fair. You know what I love is that you have an example, Brandon, where it works, right? Of why it might help to unmute, right? Does that make sense? Do you get? So what I'm hopeful that I'm drawing attention to is like how you're making decisions and how you want to facilitate this meeting. Does that make sense?
I think generally, if it's a small group, having everyone unmuted is more likely to work. But then the issue arises if you have a bunch of people, even if everyone just has a small amount of background noise, it's going to be very difficult to hear.
Yeah.
But I do kind of like having everyone being unmuted just because there's like participation costs. So if you want to speak, you can just speak instead of that kind of awkward thing of, oh, do I press the unmute button and like single myself out or not?
Yeah, that's a great point. Aaron, Ale, any thoughts from your perspective?
One thing I guess on the flip side, like I do agree with Brandon, but on the flip side, also I think what is nice about being muted is it gives you like, it's kind of like a feedback cue on like when you are able to talk, because if everyone's unmuted, then it's hard to tell like if there's just going to be like 5 people that start like talking at once. So it's like one benefit is that once you see someone unmute, then they kind of have the floor and like everyone gets to listen to them. Whereas otherwise it's a little difficult.
I agree. It's a good opportunity to be more focused on the person who's talking versus I think when we all moved to remote, there was everyone was still kind of learning what the protocol was in terms of like, okay, I need to make sure I'm on mute. That way, especially when you talk and it focuses on that person. So if there was background noise, I might refocus on someone else. So definitely the little things of being on Zoom.
Yeah. You know, one thing that I'm hearing from all of you is like, I keep kind of underscoring this, but it's like sometimes knowing when you want to have people unmute, right? So Brandon made a really good point around this idea of this risk factor, right? Of like, if I unmute myself, or what I'm interpreting it as this is like, you want to get people to talk at certain moments, right? So let's say this happens in a lot of organizations where we might be like, let's brainstorm how to get more members as part of our club. That seems pretty common as a kind of, and that might be a good time to get everyone to learn how to unmute themselves or to talk, right? But maybe Brandon, you're about to give a 20-minute session on like a project. Probably I don't need to be unmuted, right? I don't need to let you hear the cars driving by my apartment, right? So it's a kind of a understanding what is the goal, that in a in-person environment, we would just know that there's cultural practices that say, don't talk while someone else talks, right? Because naturally, what happens if we were physically together and I started talking and Brandon and Aaron also started talking at the same time? What would happen there? In person, physically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, presumably one of us would be like, oh, you can say like what you're going to say. Kind of like what happens on Zoom, but I guess a little bit more immediate and slightly less like stilted.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Say the question one more time.
Yeah, like what would happen if we were physically in person? What are the cultural practices or the kind of protocol that if we all 4 started talking at the same time, what would we do? Because somehow we were able to manage that, right?
Yeah, we would all just quiet down and see who it was that started talking first. Mm-hmm. Aaron, how are things at SLE right now? How is it? How do you all do things right now?
I mean, yeah, I don't think there's really like the way our GBMs are usually set up is that we have like our initial icebreaker in breakout rooms, so then there's not usually like any like huge issues there because it's small groups, and then we kind of go board member by board member and share like updates on events related to our different positions. So in that sense, there's kind of already an established order of speakers to kind of reduce like, you know, like who's saying what type of thing. And then usually the rest of the event is kind of led by like a visiting company representative. So depending on how they run things, then it's usually like that. And then there's a Q&A session. So yeah, not too many opportunities where people are just all unmuted at the same time.
So let's move on to a different topic, if it's okay with you all. Does that work? Have you all noticed how, at least the way that this is a facilitated dialogue, right? So I can also see what I'm hearing from Erin and this GBM, where it might be like, there's procedures, right? We're gonna go through, the president will speak, then the treasurer, the secretary, they'll give their announcement, the VP of this, or whatever the org structure. Then we have a 20-minute presenter, whatever that kind of setup is, that makes sense, right? Then there's other formats where you may want much more interactive behaviors, right? And so one of the things that I want to ask you all is, I'm going to once again share my screen, is so how many of you are in the practice of doing something like this, where you're setting the expectations of your community guidelines and or your agenda?
I believe Sweet does this, right, Erin? For the GBMs?
Yeah, and I was also going to mention I'm one of the outreach chairs, and for all of our events as well, we always put up an agenda, and I always remind them we'd love to see your faces. And I think high schoolers are more willing to, just because that's more of like just something they're doing in their classes as well. But yeah, this is something we do definitely.
What's the thumbs up for, Brandon?
So there's something else going on, just like in my background. So that was to them.
Okay, Brandon, at least for me, and it could be different for others on the call, it doesn't bother me. Like, it's okay that there's these distractions there. And so feel free to continue to talk. It's totally okay.
Okay, well, thank you.
And I say that because probably this is happening with you all as you lead your meetings, where your peers that you want to engage are also like, oh, I want to talk, but my roommate's being really loud, or my partner's watching TV and this is the only space I get Wi-Fi, or I'm outside of Starbucks trying to get Wi-Fi and there's dogs it's like there's all these things that are happening. So I'm pretty, at least in the things that I lead, I'm kind of like, it's okay, right? And I want you to participate. And it's okay for us to hear that there's these distractions, because that's where your head is right now. And so we can be in community together by you naming that. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I think generally in like various meetings I've been in, people tend to be like, they tend to accept like background noise if you're speaking. But just like if it's like you're sitting next to traffic, then sometimes, even if they aren't really like necessarily bothered by it, it can make it hard to hear.
That's fair. So one of the things that I wanted to show you is, it sounds like most of you are in a practice of sharing community guidelines, sharing an agenda. And I do this because sometimes, and I kind of probably saw this with the person who jumped off the call, there could be many reasons why that happened, but I'm very transparent early on to the agenda, being like, this is what's happening in the meeting. And because of the workshops that I facilitate, sometimes students will jump off. They're like, nope, I am not in the space to engage at this level. I wanted just information. So I tell people from the beginning, this is what I expect from you. This is what I want you, this is how I would like you to engage with the group, right? And sometimes participants will be like, this is too much, and they'll jump off the call. But then I don't have to worry about why people aren't talking, why people, because if you're distracted by other things, then it's like, go be distracted by that other thing. If you need to go cook dinner, if you need to like do your homework, if you need to write an exam, whatever it is, like go do that. Because sometimes we're getting in this culture of, I can have my Zoom on and I can play video games, or I can be on Facebook, or I can be on Discord, or I can name whatever thing you're on. And that becomes hard for you all as leaders if your participants aren't engaging. how do you all engage with the fact that you're competing on a digital device with multiple distractions? Some that are intentional by the person in your meeting, and some that are unintentional, like there's traffic outside my apartment.
I guess as far as intentional distractions, generally, if it's something, people are at least partially listening to what you're saying. So I kind of, I guess, take solace in that fact that hopefully some of it will be absorbed. And then, for instance, in like the research meetings, we'll have like the different groups present for like the different parts of the research project. And like during that time, they're definitely paying attention and engaged in presenting. And I think generally they try to be, I guess, respectful of the other people when they're presenting. And if it's something that is directly related to some assignment that you're going to do, you're probably more likely to pay attention to it. And so generally, I find people pay attention when it's important. And if they're kind of tuning you out, if you're about to say something important, maybe just say, all right, hey, here, this is something really pay attention to.
Other thoughts or responses?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of difficult because, so like as I mentioned, I'm an outreach chair, so mainly working with high schoolers where the range of like engagement is like I see them like taking like literally just taking notes on everything we're saying, super engaged, asking questions, to like visibly seeing just people like on their phones or like totally not engaged, things like that. And then having like the feedback after we asked them to fill out our surveys ranging from that like, oh, I love this event, to this was really boring, like do something different type of thing. So that's something that I like will admit that I just struggle with, because it is really hard to like kind of like interpret that engagement and be able to like make like actionable improvements if it's just such a wide range of like how people are like responding to our events, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's something that I just still like trying to like I continually am trying to like find ways for that to like work better.
Sure. Erin, can I ask you a question? For the sessions that you lead, how big are your groups?
Yeah, usually well, there's like over 200 participants, but usually each event gets around like 70, I would say, on average. So yeah, pretty large groups.
Yeah. So I asked that because some of these things, like right now we're a small group, right? So like you all fit on a screen. It's like really simple to see you all. It's wonderful. I can have these questions. But with 70 people, if I was in your place, Erin, I might not engage in these things that I'm doing with you all, right? And so then there's other formats of like it sounds like, Erin, you mentioned this for Brandon as well. Breakout rooms become a very helpful tool to say, I'm going to send you off into pairs, or I'm going to send you off into groups of 4 to have an icebreaker, to have a conversation, or I'm going to talk for 5 minutes and then I'm going to send you off. I actually, when I look at agendas personally, as a way to keep that engagement and make sure people are not being distracted, I always try to break up my presentations, and I send people in breakout rooms all the time. So they're constantly being, like, you cannot be doing something else when I'm leading a session, because I'm like, no, I need your attention, right? And sometimes people get really upset at that because they really are just trying to coast. And sometimes that's helpful. Like, I'm not here to knock people. You're all busy. But I have found it's a great way to kind of keep people on their toes. Not because I'm trying to not let you study or write your paper or catch up with a friend, but hey, I've worked quite a lot to create an agenda, and you have two. So how do you meet people where they're at? And many times people aren't going to want to talk in a 70-person room, but they might in a 3-person room or a 4-person or 5-person, right? Depending on what you feel is comfortable. But I do that all the time so that people aren't allowed to kind of doze off or do something else. Might be something worth exploring. What are other ways that you kind of prevent from it just being a long 1-hour meeting where it's just information being thrown at
you? there's our cue. We both muted. Yeah, I guess so for our or just my outreach events, so we collaborate with other student orgs so that they can kind of teach the high schoolers about different engineering majors. So we always kind of give them updates on how previous events have gone and how the high schoolers have taken it. So we usually encourage them to we basically require them to have some type of activity plan. So it's not just a flood of information in a presentation format. And that definitely is received well by them. And then also just in events that I've attended, as a college student, I think when there's a lot of questions being asked or polls being given where it's I'm required to do that engagement, I think I definitely see myself paying attention more.
Other thoughts and how to kind of break up that?
And I know something that I've tried to do is to help keep students engaged is to allow between the presenters talking a little bit, but then asking questions for everyone and then breaking them up into breakout rooms at the 20-minute mark, usually, because by then I think people are starting to feel a little bit, I'm just being talked at, or other people asking questions, and then bringing them back to ask additional questions.
I like that.
Brandon, what do you do?
Well, I mean, for just low cost kind of passive interaction, Zoom polls just for questions, those tend to get a decent number of responses. Granted, it's not particularly active engagement. At the same time, I've also, in one of the physics classes I've been in, they're doing the group work sessions, they put us in breakout rooms, but no one would talk. And so what would happen is for 5 minutes, everyone would sit there, microphone muted, camera off, and then would come back to the main session. So it's sometimes I've definitely seen it work. But if there's not one person who is willing to be the first person to engage, then it kind of, it's just a smaller version of the main room. So I guess it kind of depends upon the context. Definitely for my writing classes, breakout rooms work and people actually discuss. But for sometimes a 400-person class where 90% of people have camera off, mic muted, it's very hard to get any engagement at all.
Brendan, that's a great one. You know what I've seen happen, and I've done this, and it may not work, right? But sometimes I'll be in sessions, and sometimes students won't know that I'm not a student, which I love. And I give very explicit instructions. I tell people, you're about to go into a breakout room. I want you to talk. This is what I want you to talk about. I recognize it can be very scary to talk. I need one of you to step up and muster up the courage and break the ice. And I feel like when you give these kind of examples like this, and you'll find your own voice, and you might be like, this wouldn't work for me, Luis. You all as students are pretty open to instructions. If you're given the set of instructions, most of you will execute the work, right? So if I tell you, hey, one of you should take the lead and break the ice, one of you should figure out who's going to report out. Like, and you put it in the chat box, you put it in a Google Doc, you send it off. A lot of you, like, not, and this isn't just students, I think this is anyone in this digital environment. I don't know who you are. Like, why should I talk? Like, it's a huge risk. Like, people will have their thoughts around their insecurities of like, will they like me? What if I say something stupid? Or I don't really want to talk. Like, I have enough friends. Like, I don't, and I'll actually tell you all as students on a regular basis, hey, this is the closest that some of you will have to like interacting with each other. And my hope is that you'll make friends, that you might start the foundation, you might exchange numbers or an email. You might study together later in a different kind of Zoom call or Discord or whatever it is. And a lot of you like enjoy when I frame it as I'm sending you into this breakout room to make friends. Because I think that a lot of us are looking for them and we don't know how to say that we're looking for friends. I don't know if that would help, Brandon, but I think assigning roles and saying what is supposed to happen when I send you into the breakout room and then detailing step 1, step 2, step 3, I've seen some pretty good successes. Do you think that could help?
I think so. I think another important part of it is like some sort of accountability. So in the physics class, it was like you'd be given the answers after the breakout room anyway, and there was really no point in sharing. For the writing class, it was like you're going to be reporting out afterwards, and if you don't actually discuss, you're going to look really stupid when you have to report out. And so I think that that's part of it, making sure that there's some incentive other than just talking for you to participate in the breakout room.
I like that. Any other thoughts?
I guess another thing I've seen in like a medium-sized class, the teacher went around to breakout rooms to make sure that people were actually doing things. So that's, I guess, another way. Doesn't really work for like 400 people classes though.
Yeah, you know, it could work in the sense of saying, as I send you off into this breakout room, I may jump into your breakout, right? So then there's that kind of risk factor of like, hey, Brandon might jump into this group, right? And so, but you're right, it may not, if there's 20 groups and you're breaking out for 10 minutes, are you really going to jump through all 20 groups in 10 minutes? Probably not. But, you know, like you said, there's a kind of incentive slash, in some cases, you kind of want to activate certain behaviors that might be like, oh, I got to do something because I'm being asked to report out. I'm not going to be given the answer. I'm going to be asked to share my input. I might get a prize. Some of you might give prizes, you know, like, I don't know, if you have money incentives, you might give away a $5 gift card or something and say like, whoever gives the best answer, maybe, who knows? Other thoughts around that? Or around this, I mean.
Those are all really great ideas, though, in terms of, I like what you said, Luis, about sending you to this breakout room to make friends.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to share the screen again. One thing that I personally am very big on what is known as like a self-grounding or an activity that kind of brings you into the present moment. So as an example, I'll ask people like, grab a piece of paper and a writing instrument like a pen. You can turn off your camera and then I'll play music. And then I'll play music and I'll say like, I want you to breathe in 3 times and I'll guide the person through breathing exercises. And then I'll have them, you know, draw a line as they listen to the music, right? And it'll be like a classical instrumental song. Or maybe it's like, you know, a song that's, you know, a top chart song that students are enjoying or your participants are liking. And maybe it's getting up and dancing. Turn off your camera or turn it on. And, you know, things that kind of allow you to be in your body, I've seen good successes in, because you also want to help students and your participants to be present, right? And so I'll oftentimes in initial sessions, I'll say like, hey, I get it. You're distracted by a midterm. You got to write 5 papers by tomorrow and you need to study for that physics exam. How do I bring you to right now, right? And so I oftentimes encourage people to do some kind of bodily exercise, whether it's breathing exercises, something to do with drawing, something to do with listening to music, closing your eyes. Do any of you engage in some of these practices?
I haven't ever really seen that implemented. I mean, sometimes like before a class starts, I've seen teacher play music through Zoom. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure I've seen it though directly related to engagement. But I can see how that can make an interesting like kind of starter activity to make people feel a bit more comfortable.
Ale or Aaron? Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, I engage in mindfulness throughout the week using the Calm app.
Do you do it in your set, like when you're doing meetings with students, with staff?
I haven't done it with students yet. I think that would be a really good way to kind of set the moment, especially as students are waiting for something to start.
I like that.
I haven't yet, so that's a good takeaway.
Aaron?
Okay, wait, Wi-Fi's cutting out a bit. So I think I like started before on accident, but yeah, so definitely playing the music like at the start of events. I feel like it's pretty helpful to kind of like get everyone like more excited for the event in a way. And then also it usually like ends up having some conversation where someone's like, "Oh, like this is such a good playlist." They're like, "Oh, what is this song? Like I love this." And so then people kind of get more engaged with the chat as well, which is nice.
Yeah, I love it. I think music is really anything that can. So as an example, like I like to use backgrounds, right? So like every background I have is a photo of somewhere I've been. And sometimes I do it and I forget what background I'm using. And for me, it's a great way because as people are quiet, they'll be like, what is that? Like where, you know? And sometimes they'll be like, oh, this is a picture of me in India, right? And then people will have their own ideas. I've always wanted to go there, or like I want to study abroad there. And you just allow people, and music is the same idea. When you listen to a song and you're like, oh, I like that song, or that's one of my favorite songs, or never heard that song. Can you tell me who it is? And your goal, I would say, is always getting people to talk, getting people to become more open to unmuting, to engaging, to wanting to share a little bit more about themselves. Because then it makes it easier as you deliver an idea and be like, oh, I is the person who likes this one song and I like that song too. Or, oh, I had this really good chat with Aaron about topic whatever that had nothing to do with the conversation at hand, right? But you're starting to kind of build that warmth. Like, if in person, some of you might have said something like, oh, I like your jacket, Brandon. Like, that's really cool. Like, looks nice on you. We might do that in Zoom, but it doesn't happen as often, right? And so, but like, you're trying to make these small talks in a virtual environment when people are also like, I don't want to talk. I'm nervous, right? But at the same time, I want to talk. All right. We're ending just to time check at 5 or 4:50.
At 5.
Okay. Well, let's keep moving along if it's okay with you all. So this happens often, and I'm sure we probably don't have to talk way too much about it. This idea of like introductions. How do you engage people to introduce themselves? I will oftentimes write it in a PowerPoint presentation, and then I'll put it in the chat box. I personally like questions that might invite some curiosity or some kind of practice that people will have fun with. So like in this one, I came up with, Crayola wants you to name a crayon after you. What color would it be? And what is that name? And it's just, something that might hopefully bring in curiosity or might get people thinking about new things. It sounds like you all do something like this, but this is a great time to share ideas if you do something else, or, because I think it's really important to not just see, yes, I know I can see all your names, but I think we need to get into the practice of finding ways to allow people to introduce themselves, whether it's in the breakout room, whether it's in the large session. But I think people really enjoy knowing that I had the opportunity to introduce myself and to meet other people. Thoughts, comments, what have you seen work or not work?
I mean, I've definitely seen introductions be useful. Um, Probably the largest group I've seen, like everyone introducing themselves, is maybe like 30 people or so. Beyond that, it just kind of takes like a bit too long. But I have also seen like people using breakout rooms for introductions, so you don't get to know like everybody, but you get to know maybe like 5 or 6 people, and that's definitely helpful. It kind of, it almost like validates your presence. Like I am not just like some like random picture on a screen. You get to share something about yourself that is you kind of like, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in meetings before where we basically were just asked to write all of that like intro information in the chat, and then like everyone sent it all at once to just kind of get like a feel for where everyone was at, but then not like waste the time on just that kind of like generic, like the usual, you know, like, oh, what's your major? And then breakout rooms were for like kind of that more like the example question you had on the screen, where it's kind of like a more random thing that would get like people talking on like some type of deeper level in that sense. And kind of like that.
So I want to pick up something that I heard you say, Aaron, and you maybe didn't mean anything bad by it, but I think that there's a lot of people who facilitate meetings who are like, I don't have time to introduce. I don't have time for this kind of like, basic introduction, tell me your major take. I think there's a lot of value in the present moment in the virtual environment to slow down your meetings in some way, whether it's through breakout rooms or everyone goes, right? But to really, like, as Brandon mentioned, it validates people that they're not just someone else on the screen. So even if it's a 70 person, 100, 200 person room, I am more than glad to spend 5 minutes to throw people quickly into a breakout room, even if I don't get to meet all 200 participants. But I do think it brings that idea of I'm not just one of many. I don't know. So I just wanted to make a comment to that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And that's what I was saying. There was kind of like, it was that initial chat and then the breakout rooms. Just because I do feel like if, you know, it was like a room of like 70 people and everyone went around saying like, this is my name, this is my major, then it kind of just doesn't have any meaning to it, because by the, you know, like 10th person, then you're like, oh, like what was the first person's major? But then, yeah, definitely with those breakout rooms, I think it's like the quality is like way higher because you're actually like getting to make connections with just like that small group of people, for sure.
So another thought that I have for you all in terms of engagement is, I don't know if any of you have used something like a Jamboard or the Whiteboard function of Zoom, but it can be very helpful to have people do something like this whiteboard. So I'm going to actually exit out of it again. Have you all used some kind of whiteboard or some kind of collaborative tool like Jamboard?
I mean, the Zoom whiteboard.
You have used a Zoom whiteboard?
Yeah, same. That's all I've used before.
So in the chat box, I'm going to drop this Jamboard. If you click on it, you'll be brought, and it's a Google software, right? So it's usually pretty accessible. There's nothing very complex about it. I'm going to share my screen so we can see it. But so here we go. And what I'll do is I'll oftentimes have preloaded questions, and it might be something like, I mean, that's not really a good question, but you'll post something like this, right? Yeah, exactly. Hi. And then you allow people to start brainstorming ideas. And it's a great way, in my opinion, to get people just kind of interacting with each other in a very low stake way of being able to allow people to do their own thing and then just add different things. And then you start to maybe think, oh, these two things are together. and you can move them around, and then you can start having a conversation about what you're seeing, right? I also really appreciate it because then sometimes you can also create new slides, right? And you might move on. You might have like 3 or 4 questions. You might create them all in advance. So you might say something like, okay, now we're going to move on as a group and we're going to talk about and your GBM might be like, hey, everyone, like we need to keep growing our membership. We need to get more students involved. We want to push forth the mission. How do we drive engagement? And then everyone just, you might say 5-10 minutes of just throwing all these ideas. And then once you have all your ideas down, you start to kind of highlight themes or concepts. And the beauty of it that some people may enjoy is you can come back to it, right? And so you can have this artifact, this kind of memory of what you discussed. And so it could be helpful. So just another way of maybe engaging people. All right. As a pretty poor presenter, I should have probably timed myself a little bit more. But I want to talk about what techniques you use to engage with participants, which you already kind of started, but there's this acronym that talks about, it's called Terra, and it's this idea of tribe. So when you know, hey, this is my tribe, these are my people, right? So like right now we're in community. I feel comfortable with you all. I feel like you're my people. But sometimes we're in meetings where it's like, I'm going into a meeting and I don't really feel like these are my people, right? Maybe I'm in a class or in a group where I've never been here. And so now I'm kind of nervous. If I say something, might they listen to me? Might they not? And so tribe is always thinking, am I making people feel comfortable and included? So what practices do I engage in that make a community, right? So thinking about this idea of what about this call makes me feel like I'm connected? Or what about this call makes me feel like I'm excluded, right? So thinking about the higher you make people feel that they're connected to each other, that there's a common mission, the easier they will be to exploring thoughts, talking. The second one stands for expectation. So that's where the agenda idea comes in. Like, hey, just so you know, this is what's going to happen. The less I know about what the meeting or the session is about, the more uncertainty I have to grapple with and the less comfortable I feel. Have any of you been to a meeting where you don't know why you're in the meeting, what you're going to do? When do you call the meeting as successful? How does that make you feel?
I mean, it's kind of just like disengaging. Like you don't really, if you don't really understand why you're even in the meetings, I mean, why even be there at all? And it makes it hard to contribute. And I mean, for me at least, I can still pay attention. But if I don't really care, I'm not probably going to gain much from it.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think like what Brandon said covers it. Like sometimes if I go to an event and then it's just completely not like what I was expecting, then I'm more likely to just like leave the meeting early or things like that because it feels like it doesn't apply to me and I like, you know, would rather be doing like homework or things like that. Definitely.
So imagine if you have a high feeling of interconnectedness, right? And you have a very clearly defined, articulated expectation, you're going to have higher engagement, right? The next one is this idea of rank. And rank has to do with order, right? There's a social order. In meetings, it might be like, okay, I'm the head facilitator, right? So do I make you all, and you could actually tell me, this would be great feedback. Do you feel like you have the ability to challenge me, to question me, to engage with me? Or do I assert my role as the facilitator in a way that precludes you from wanting to talk or inhibits you from wanting to talk?
I mean, I feel like I'd be able to have like a discussion with you. Like if I happen to disagree with you on something, I would feel comfortable with like expressing why. But I don't know, like you are very good at making people talk. Like I probably would have just sat here with camera off and microphone muted the entire time otherwise. And I guess it helped that it's a small group. But I guess just like directly saying like, Brandon, what do you think? I mean, it worked.
I always use people's names. The moment that you say, actually, here's a good one, Brandon. Here's a tip. Every time people come in, I always go like, as they come into the artificial room, I'll be like, good morning, Brandon, or good afternoon, Brandon. Nice to see you, Aaron. Oh, hi, Ale. And what do you think would naturally happen if I say, good morning, Aaron?
I say it back.
You would say it back. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I see a grid and I ask a question and no one's talking, I'll give it time. I'll take my breaths. I'll kind of calm myself down. I'll count to 10. I'll wait. And then when no one's talking, I'll just say people's names like, oh, what are you thinking, Brandon? What are you thinking, Aaron? Oh, I'd love to hear from you, Natalie. Oh, Juan. And someone will unmute. So it's really the rank area is like this idea of like, do I create an order that allows for people to talk? And so as leaders, think about what your order is and say like, if you're the president and you're the head of the meeting, do you demonstrate ways that people, it doesn't matter that you're the head of the meeting, you actually value everyone's ideas, right? And then being mindful of your time or our time. The last one is autonomy. I think I spelled that right. There we go. Autonomy. Do I actually believe that I'm an independent individual person in this meeting? Do I believe that I can step out of the crowd without fear of prosecution, of judgment? And this is really important. So if you keep this acronym in mind in all your practices, you will likely drive pretty high engagement as to how you facilitate meetings, as how you participate. And so hopefully an acronym like this can be helpful. It's time. Any questions on your end?
Not really.
This was great. Thank you so much, Luis.
Anytime. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's been quite helpful.
Cool. Keep me posted if I can help you in any way. And let me know how you engage people. Like I'm always interested in hearing how we engage in a virtual environment because there's a lot of cool tools out there.
Will do.
Righty then. See y'all later then.
Bye,
See you.
Aaron. Bye,
Thank
Brandon.
you.
Bye. Thanks again. Have a good night.
Bye.
Hi, Luis.
Hi.
I'm sorry. I know we had a stop.